everybody. Welcome back to the HR in Action podcast. Today's special guest is KaShondra Anikwe, and she is the CEO of Regeneration Management Consulting. And I'm excited to have her on the podcast today and talk about some different HR topics. She also works in the defense space or government federal space like I do. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about there. But let's jump into it. And Chandra, I'll turn it over to you if you don't mind starting off with a little introduction about yourself.
Sure. Awesome. And Aaron, thank you so much for having me on the podcast today. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is KaShondra Anikwe, as Aaron stated. So I run an HR and operations management consulting business. Regeneration Management Consulting. I know that's a mouthful, so I just call it RMC for short. And so this is where I support small and growing organizations, especially in the government contracting and professional services realm. I've got a lot of experience with those two industries. And so a lot of the work that I focus on really is helping leaders move from reactive HR to very intentional and purposeful systems and processes for their businesses. I do a variety of work. So anything ranging from onboarding to compliance to manager support and development, and really building processes that work in real life for my clients. So that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. So then companies are bringing you in kind of on more like temporary projects then, like they have a pain or a need and then, they need support. Is that kind of how it works?
That's right. Exactly. That's right. Now I do have some longer term clients, so helping them with things such as payroll management as an example, right? So that's kind of an ongoing type of thing. But for the most part, a lot of the work I'm doing is temporary projects, developing training programs or creating onboarding systems, anything, that requires templates and SOPs and things of that nature for my clients as well. So yeah, that's it. You got it.
So we were talking before we started about some of the issues that you're seeing right now in the environment. Government is a very interesting place right now with all the changes. We finally, at least in the defense side and most agencies, finally have a budget signed.
Yes.
As of yesterday, I guess, or Tuesday, which, this will air a few weeks past that. But there's been a lot of ups and downs with the shutdowns and the policy changes and reorganizations and all this kind of stuff. So sounds like things are getting, they're more stressful and people are so busy and trying to be reactive. Can you maybe talk a little more about what you're seeing with your companies that you're working with?
Absolutely. So yes, I certainly agree with you. It's certainly it is a very interesting time we're in the government contracting world. So much is changing. So there are some things that are really allowing a lot of my clients to be able to grow in a lot of ways. And then in some areas, not so much, right? So if there is a, either the shutdown, for example, or earlier in the presidency last year where we saw, a couple of departments were shut down, right? And so some of my clients were impacted by that, right? And so having to experience major layoffs as well. So a lot of different things kind of happening there. And what I'm really noticing is many of the managers and leaders are being overwhelmed by that. So they're overwhelmed by having to either let go of, employees who have been with the organization for long periods of time and have provided great support, or they're overwhelmed by the company expanding, so quickly, because there are new incumbents coming from other contracts, right? And so now you have a company that has gone, they had, let's say 10 employees, and now they're at 50, right? Just from adding one new contract. And so there's a lot of, I think, overwhelm there. And I believe that that's why foundational HR systems need to be in place proactively, right? Instead of reactively, so that managers know how to handle that. They know how to not have to deal with quickly trying to cobble together a policy or a procedure or a process, right, that may not even make sense a couple months from now. So that's definitely been, some of the larger things that I've seen. And a lot of it as well, too, I think is what I'm noticing is that because managers are being reactive, they're not necessarily bringing in all of the appropriate stakeholders to help them make those better decisions for the organization as a whole. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we're kind of hoping for some of that growth too, but that's, it's not a, I mean, you hear about all these crazy things like in pharmaceuticals and tech where like companies go from, hundreds to thousands within months or years, which is massive, just crazy growth.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the government, it's much more of a step function. You win a contract and all of a sudden you're 10 to 50, 50 to 200, right? Depending on the size of the contract. And that's a very different, especially with all the rules and regulations and having an auditable, DCAA compliant accounting system. And you get into OFCCP requirements on the HR side.
Mm-hmm.
You can go from 0 to 60 in a very quick amount of time, and profit margins aren't super high. So it's not like you can, most companies, I would guess, like mine, it's not like we have hundreds of thousands of dollars to invest in that on the,
Exactly.
not knowing when that's going to happen.
Right.
And it's sort of, right now we're in this just terrible waiting game, which is like you don't get any. They don't post status updates on contracts. You submit a proposal 6 months later, sometime, one day you just find out, oh my God, we won. And then it's like crazy, chaos. And you're trying to do 100 different things, staff the people that you need, right? Build the process and the standards and just continue to scale that.
Yeah. And not only that, Aaron, but even just thinking about in the situations where you have incumbents, right? And so the client would prefer, for you to bring those incumbents in. And so now we're trying to have these incumbents come into the company's culture, right? And so having to implement them into that as well. And so, again, if we're talking about a contract where 50 new people are coming on board, how do we make sure that that resonates, that culture that we're trying to build, right? And it's easier to do when you're a smaller organization, right? But as you get bigger, how do we make sure that that is instilled in, in all of our employees, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And we call it badge flipping, right? And there's what I found, a lot of companies, there's more of a button seat mentality. They're almost, in the services side, it's a very sort of staffing mentality as opposed to company, but it's hard. You've got employees on the contracting. When you're contracting like that, they're typically embedded in the government organization. So you're trying to define your own company culture when your employees, other than your corporate team, your direct billable, which is 70-80% of your team usually, if not more, they live in another culture all day, right? A government culture, which you might be able to influence, but you definitely don't own or control. And so it's a very challenging thing. So I'm super interested with the companies you're working with. Like, what are you seeing, and what kind of stuff are you doing to help, them identify, define, communicate, maintain their cultures, and make sure that employees who are coming in, oftentimes very aligned to their client, right? They see there's an identity aspect of do you work for this company and happen to support this client right now, or do you work for this
Right.
client and happen to support this company right
That's
now?
right. That's
Right?
right. Yeah, yeah. That's a great question. And it's very much so a reality
Yeah,
for many of my
that's
clients.
life.
And so I am a very hands-on HR person. And so I really do believe that a lot of it starts with developing your managers appropriately and consistently having communication and reiterating um, whether it's a policy process, that culture, right? Employee engagement, just making sure that whatever the actual company's mission and vision is actually being presented to the new employee, and that the manager is able to actually, communicate that appropriately, right? And so oftentimes when I think about my role, and of course that's going to adjust a little bit depending on the client, because I do have some clients where I am literally doing the entire employee life cycle for them, right? And then some clients where I'm only doing specific projects, right? And so I might not be able to be as hands-on with those clients, but oftentimes for the clients where I am doing, a plethora of things for them, I'm taking the time to sit with their managers and identify areas of improvement, right? So talking to them about what's working well within the organization and what isn't working well, actually asking them what is the true culture of this business, right? And is that contrary to the core values that we have here in this employee handbook, right? And what are the solutions and steps that you think can be implemented in order for us to go from what's really happening to what we want to happen. And so I often will spend a lot of time with the managers to really just kind of do some discovery with them, right? And I want them to be very transparent with me. And then from there, I'm working with them to develop a plan that we can, present to our executive team, right? And talk to them about some of the, concerns, right, that we might have, or, just kind of strengthening the culture that might already be there. There is one of my clients, they have a very, very strong culture. And I think a lot of that has to do with their management. The managers actually speak to the employees who are on the ground on client site. They're speaking to them consistently. And if it's not, of course, daily, because, that can be taxing on any manager, at least once a week, they're having, dedicated time where they're following up with their employees. I'm working with them on creating employee engagement activities, right? We're working on creating rewards programs and systems, right? So again, just making sure that that employee is tied back to the company specifically. And so when the employee knows that they're being seen and being heard, right, from the company, then they identify with that organization versus saying, well, actually, I'm truly an employee of the government, right? And I just happen to receive a paycheck from this contractor. But
Right.
it's very hard. It is very hard to break into that, especially when you have those employees that have actually worked for a government client for, let's say 5, 6, 7 years, right?
Yeah,
And they
or
already have
more.
or more. Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, and I think there's some people you're just not going to change, but that's there's most of the people I think you can have a good balance there. So it sounds like you're working with the managers. Are the managers you're working with also typically direct billable, or are these more like higher level
So a little
corporate
bit of
level?
both. Some of them are actually on the ground as well too, and then there are some who are higher up.
Yeah.
And so, they're just making sure that they're consistently speaking with the employees. which I highly encourage, right? There should be no reason why an employee hasn't spoken with their manager over several months, right?
Oh, yeah.
I certainly would not recommend it. And so that is one of the things that I would typically, train a manager on, is that, just speaking with the client is not enough. If you want to make sure that the employees are actually connected with the organization, you have to take the time to get to know them, right?
Right.
So.
Yeah, in one of my prior companies, we actually created a position. We called it an employee ambassador, and they helped with onboarding and that whole entry process with employees. But a big portion of their role was really to just go walk the floors, right, and go make sure that they're talking to employees and helping, I guess, the managers get that information, right, and being almost like a more safe, less, because there's something I learned in leadership roles, is that no matter how approachable you think you are, there's still this stigma that comes with being the boss.
Right.
That a lot of people have this perception regardless of what you do. And it takes a lot of time to kind of break that down sometimes based on their prior experiences. But it's hard as a leader. So I think that's great, sitting down and helping reinforce that and, show them ways to do those things, because it's, as a leader in these types of roles, and I think this applies across anything, not just government, but you're busy. You got a day job, so to speak, right? And a lot of times working with your people are not what you consider or see as your day job or one of the, those core things. It doesn't have the direct, I do this, we result in profit or outcome or value. It's more indirect, right? We support the people, they provide support, they do better, their performance improves over time. But man, it's so critical. So these are almost like coaching sessions mixed with a little bit, it sounds like, discovery and like, a qualitative sort of assessment. What kind of guidance or skills or coaching are you sort of leveraging when you're giving recommendations and advice to these leaders?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I certainly spend a lot of time trying to keep up with various HR magazines and, different communities, just trying to glean from other HR leaders, right, on how they are working to develop their managers, right, for their specific companies. I also do a lot of time kind of reviewing different platforms, right, and trying to see, is this something that could be beneficial to, this particular client that might be, experiencing some type of issue. So whether that be them not understanding how to have appropriate conversations with their employees, or maybe they don't understand how a reasonable accommodation process works, right? So are there ways that I can find resources for them, or is this something that I can just, develop and kind of create a very customized solution? So a lot of it for me is research and trying to leverage the resources that are already available to me. And primarily that's because they're still a small business, right? Like they can't afford some of these larger learning management systems and, very customized speakers to come in and things like that. And so I have to be mindful, of course, of their budget, whether or not they can even afford to purchase some of these, fancier platforms that might be very helpful for them, right? But, in most cases, they can't afford a $50,000 a year product, right? So definitely leveraging that. And then I also do spend quite a bit of my time even speaking to executives. And so I often find that they're very helpful as well, right? Talking to them about either mentorship opportunities, right? Are they interested in doing that with some of their managers? Or, what are some types of associations that they've been part of that have been very helpful from a professional development standpoint? So a lot of that is what I would typically focus on and present that to, the manager. And again, a lot of this is very customized and very specific to, a particular client, right? So.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and that's how we met, right?
Right.
I got a tool for communication. I can help you with that.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to throw a shameless plug in there, but I didn't know if that was appropriate. So.
Hey, I try not to shamelessly plug my own stuff, but if you want to do it, I'm not going to stop you. Pro actor.
Right.
So, do you have any stories of examples when you've been working as something that really worked, or some, advice that you think was really, really impactful, or a feedback you got from someone that was hard hitting?
Yeah. Let me think about this.
That's a tougher question.
Yeah, man. I mean, I know there's so many times where I've been faced with a situation and I wasn't necessarily sure how to handle it, and really just had to think more strategically about it. I'm thinking about, so I'm not sure if this does answer your question or not, but I'll use an example of something that happened more recently.
Sure.
I was working with a client, and there was something that occurred. With some of their personnel that they didn't, client didn't like it. And so next thing I know, a whole bunch of emails are being sent out, and there's a new policy that's being built, and none of it was run by HR, right? So I have no idea what's going on. And so I'm looking at the policy, I'm looking at the forms, I'm looking at this, new process, and it is not compliant. It's, making mention of certain things that, are not best practice, right? I'll say that way. And so, very obviously created by AI. I love AI, please don't, come for me that I'm talking badly about AI. In this particular instance, I think it can be a great, useful tool, but it was very obviously a process that had been developed by AI. And so I had to have a sit down with, the manager and kind of walk through why the information that they had placed out there was not appropriate, right? And kind of just spend some time with trying to understand why in general they felt the need to reactively create this thing versus us having a conversation about, the situation that was at hand in particular. And I'm trying to be a little mindful. I don't want to be too specific, totally. Because of some of the things that went on there. But so, I experience often issues like that where a manager will see something they don't like. So now all of a sudden I'm angry. So I'm going to throw this out there at the employee. And we haven't had any, discussion with the employee. We haven't talked to them about, what could have been done differently, right? We're just being very reactive and throwing something out there that is probably not going to be beneficial for the organization as a whole, and more than likely is not even sustainable. So I spent some time with that particular client, again, just trying to identify what was truly going on, and then helping them to develop a process and a policy that was better suited for all of the employees and not necessarily targeting one specific employee. So that was interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. That came up yesterday. I was talking with somebody about in the government, there's a tendency to, whenever something happens, right, an issue or a problem, right, kind of like when every law that exists, typically, I would assume for the most part, is not created because someone just thought, hey, just in case.
Right.
It's created because somebody did it and they want to make sure nobody else does it, right? Exactly. And the government in particular has a tendency to, whenever those things happen, they sometimes over design and they want to roll out all right, we're going to make sure this never happens again. So we're going to throw in this new process and this form and this, check or this review. And next thing you know, that's bureaucracy. The negative aspect of bureaucracy is now you're just doing things to do things, not really necessarily looking at the benefit. But I think that's great. You got to get to like, okay, well, hold on, let's take a step back. Why'd you create this in the first place?
Right.
Right. And let's get to the root cause and figure out what's the problem we're really trying to solve. Right.
Right. Yeah,
And think of it that
absolutely.
way.
Yeah, and you actually make a really good point about the bureaucracy, excuse me, of it all. And I think that that's where HR really does play a pivotal role, right? I mean, our role, and I think that often is where there's a misconception, right? We're not the bad guys, I promise, right? We are, the people who, of course, want to be compliant, but we are also very compassionate, right? And so to bring that humanity back into HR when you're discussing particular things, policies, processes, whatever it might be with employees, I think is why HR is so pivotal for or detrimental for an organization.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of HR groups have a bad rap because sometimes there does tend to be like if the whole compliance versus culture sort of thing, right? Everyone I think has in HR you typically tend towards one or the other, and you can
Right.
kind of tell, right? And both are important, and you need both. But if you get too far, I think to either side, um, you that's where you run into problems. And on the compliance side, you start seeing people not as humans but as resources, which is where like even the term HR, right, isn't necessarily the greatest. Like I think
True.
you need to see people as humans, not as resources. Otherwise, you do get into this sort of bureaucratic policy thing, and that has nothing to do with the government. That's just, I think, a tendency on the
Sure.
compliance side with HR or any, area like that. And it's all about balance. I think you got to find that balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that sometimes that it can be difficult to find that balance, right? But I do think that when you're able to do that, it does create fairness, right? It creates
Yeah.
consistency, it creates trust, right, with the employee. And so, um, and I think the other hard part about it is that everyone is so different. So if one person is, very soft spoken and, all of that, how you approach them about a particular thing is very different from someone who's super direct and does not want you to beat around the bush, like just tell me what the issue is, right? And then, they're the perfect employee, right? Like that's very different from someone else who might not necessarily speak or behave in that way. And so to be able to find the balance between both of those very different types of people can be difficult for sure, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and the bigger you get, you can't do a one size fits all. Well, you can't do a custom solution that fits every single person individually, but you also can't necessarily do a one size fits all solution
Yeah.
either. I mean, the bigger you are, the more diversity I would assume you would typically have. But
Yeah.
yeah. So going back to the AI thing that you mentioned, I just because it's such a hot topic, but I think what you were getting at is such an important aspect of AI. It's not that AI is good or bad, really. It's the way we use it, right? And I
Right.
think your example was a perfect example of where we have a tendency to use it to sort of outsource our thinking, right? Or kind of get out of our swim lane too far,
Right.
where it's like, well, I'm no lawyer, but I'll just have ChatGPT write up this contract, right? Like, okay,
Right.
and it might make a decent contract, but
Yeah.
is it considering all the things that you need to make sure that it's considering, right? And so I
Exactly.
don't know. A contract's one thing, if you have a decent idea of what a typical contract and template is. But when you're
Right.
talking about people stuff, like you said, that gets a lot more complicated.
For
And is
sure.
the AI really taking into consideration all of the complexities of your culture and your company and the other policies that you already have and the things that are going on and every law and compliance aspect that needs to be shaped in, it's usually going to spit out what you, a component of what you give it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of see it as like we have this option right now where we can outsource our thinking to AI or we can use AI to upscale our thinking,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
that's
Yeah.
harder, but I think it's a better way to do it. Um,
I absolutely agree with that. I actually had a conversation with someone the other day about AI. So I was sharing with them that I for the most part I often just use AI to enhance written communication, right? So if I'm sending emails, as an example. Um, and so they told me that they do the same thing. And so I said, okay, well, what prompts are you using? Because, I mean, as we just stated, AI is only as good as the information that you feed it, right? And
mhm.
what you're asking it for. And so their response was, I just say, please review my email, right? And I laughed so hard because okay, sure, it will, make a couple changes for you, but is it going to take into consideration the flow of the conversation? Is it going to, talk to you about whether the tone is the appropriate tone that you wanted to give off? Does it know who your actual audience is, right? So there's so many ways and things, and I think that, as a culture, because we don't have a good understanding of how to appropriately use AI in a way that can, like you said, upscale, right? Only to upscale and enhance our current thoughts, right? But not to use it for our actual thoughts. And so I think that certainly, we all need to have some better education from that perspective. And it is very frustrating to have to deal with, speaking with clients about, okay, AI is great, but they're not an HR specialist, right? I've been doing this for, almost 16, 17 years now. And I'm pretty sure I know a lot more than AI does about how to create this particular policy and to take in all the nuances of your organization, right? So
Yeah, well, and I think it'll continue to get better and better in its training, but yeah, something that I found, and I think so. There's a personality trait or a dispositional characteristic that people have. We call it a mode of response, right? Where you can be more direct or indirect, right? And
Mhm.
leaders oftentimes tend to be more directive,
Yeah.
right, than or direct than indirect, which means short, sweet, to the point, as opposed to very detailed and wordy. So the person that's telling you the story with every little last detail, they're a very indirect person. The leader that comes in and says, hey, I need you to get this done, it's like, how do you want me? Not just get it done, right? That's the
Mhm.
direct leader. There's also other aspects of like perceiving versus judging, wanting all the data and the analysis. But I think AI right now, in terms of prompt engineering, is favored, highly favored to those people that are more indirect, because by default you want to be more detailed, and so you're just going to inherently want to give the AI more information.
Yeah.
And whereas it's I see is this pretty dangerous. You go in like, well, just review my email, like, holy crap, based on what? Like, what do you actually want? And the AI is not going to come back and say, well, you know what, that's not enough detail for me, can you please tell me more specifics? Would you like
Exactly.
me to review it for this or that or that? It's only going to do that if you tell it to say, hey, I want you to review this email, but I don't know what I want you to focus on, can you ask me questions to
Exactly.
figure out how to do it? And then it could help you figure it out. And that's
Right.
like, I think, the upscaling piece. But
Hmm.
I think that's something that we had to be aware of. With, yeah, it's what you put in is what you get out in terms of the level of detail that you
Yeah,
give it and how much
absolutely.
it's actually going to pull from the right sources.
Right,
Um,
right.
so yeah,
Very good point. Yeah, and I think it can provide a great baseline for sure. But you still have to have your own originality in there, right? So, absolutely.
so what have you done any trainings recently or any programs that you're really excited about or that went really well?
Yeah, so there's one of my clients right now. I'm actually not doing HR for them, but I'm doing operations management work for them. And so right now I'm working on developing how they can utilize various tools such as Power Apps and Teams and SharePoint to really create a knowledge share for their managers. So I'm really excited about this project. It allows me to, spend some more time with the managers, right, and really see how we can make some improvements upon, the current weekly or bi-weekly meetings that they might have at the organization, right? So I'm really excited about that project in particular, and I know it will take some time to, put some of those things together, especially when, you're getting into the weeds with tools like Power Apps, right? And you're creating basically applications with the Office 365 platforms, right, in a way that's easily accessible for various managers. So I'm really, really excited about that project. And then I have another client right now where I'm developing a training for them on performance reviews and really creating a goal setting and, performance review environment culture, right, for their organization. They're pretty small right now, so they have about 10 employees, but due to some of the shifts in the government contracting, they believe that they'll probably have quite a bit more before the year is out. So they're probably planning on expanding to about 75 or so. And so that's pretty significant growth for a small business, right?
Huge.
And so working on this particular CEO is really, really focused on wanting to make sure that his people are developed, right? That they feel supported, that they have the resources that they need to grow in their particular position. So not only am I creating that particular process and system for them, but I'm also developing a training for their managers so that they understand how to, appropriately set goals with their employees and review employee performance right throughout the year. So, yeah. Those are the two main things that I'm super excited about right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's good to see when companies are, trying to get ahead of the game, right? They're predicting the growth. They know it's coming, and they want to be ready for it, and not have to be reactive, like you said. Like, a lot of companies are struggling with right now. And I mean, the defense budget's only getting bigger, and not that I'm a huge proponent of that, but I guess it is the industry I'm in, so it doesn't hurt. But we want to be able to do that in a way that leads to better outcomes, better products, and better people, and happier people do better quality work, and and go home at the end of the day fulfilled, ideally, right?
That's right. That's right.
Tell me more about the process that you're putting in. Are you doing kind of a sort of an annual structure, or are you building in any kind of one-to-one, monthly, quarterly kind of stuff?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so for the goal setting and performance review process right now, a lot of it is one-on-one. So of course, annual performance review that would occur at the end of the year. That's the client's preference, but it's a little more informal than I've seen in times past with other clients, and I think that's partially because a lot of companies are moving away, honestly, from the very traditional performance review, right? Which certainly makes sense to me. If it's not working for your organization, why try to implement that, right? So in this one, what the CEO is really looking for is just trying to, again, make sure that his employees are being developed. Do they have the resources? Are we finding trainings and seminars and conferences and certifications, right, that might be of best interest to them? And so I'm developing a one-on-one process for the managers to have with employees, at least on a monthly basis. And then either quarterly or semi-annually. They're kind of having a more informal touch base as far as any professional development goals that have been created with the employees throughout the year. And I know sometimes that can be difficult as well, too, from a government contractor standpoint, because you have the goals that the client has for you, right? And the projects you need to take care of here. And then there might be other, goals that your actual company would desire for you to, to implement for yourself, right? So it could be, if my client is DOD, or excuse me, defense, and there are, 4 main projects they want me to take care of this year, but I might still have on this other side where the client is saying, okay, well, is there any interest in any types of certifications, right? So PMP, for example, or CISSP, just really depending on your role, right? And so sometimes that can be hard for employees to be able to navigate that as well. And so that's why I'm trying to put into place a system where managers are, again, making sure that they're speaking with their employees consistently throughout the year and not just one time a year, right. Which is what we traditionally see, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a balance. It's almost like, you think about like keeping your house clean, right? It's, every 6 months, every year, whatever, spring cleaning, right? You want to do a deep dive, deep clean and go through all your junk that you've accumulated throughout the year and maybe get rid of some stuff. And so, it's important to do that. Just like in a performance review, it's good to, every year, every 6 months to go kind of deep dive and look at the trends and see the forest from the trees.
Right.
But you also, you're not going to wait 4 months to clean your dishes, right? Mm-hmm. Or, something that's a spill. You need to address those right away. Yeah. And nobody wants to hear that they've been messing something up or that something they were doing wasn't aligned with, what the expectations were. Right. 6 months, 4 months, 8 months later, when they could have been doing something about it. And so there's this balance between those more informal, recurring kind of meetings where you can set goals and provide good objective feedback versus those kind of deep dives of let's dig in and kind of do an overall evaluation, see where we're at.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think this is where I'll do a shameless plug for you a little bit here. I think that that's where your tool Proactor can be very helpful, right? Because I oftentimes think that managers are just unsure of how to appropriately communicate to their employee effective feedback, right? And there's I think a very common misconception that feedback is a bad thing. I welcome feedback. If I'm doing something wrong, or if there's a way that I could learn to be more efficient with something, please tell me, right? But I think more often than not, we see that there is, a negative connotation associated with that. And so because of that, managers really struggle to be able to say to an employee, hey, I've been seeing you do this thing. Let's talk about it because, we need to make some adjustments in this area, right? It's not a reflection on your character. It's not a reflection on, you being a bad employee, but I'm noticing something that needs some improvement, right? And I think a lot of managers really struggle with that. So your tool is helpful. It gives them an opportunity to be able to rehearse, right? And feel more comfortable with having those conversations with their employees.
Yeah. Well, feedback's one of my areas of research. I could go on for hours about it, but I mean, usually, when you think of feedback just from a terminology perspective, people don't usually use the term feedback in a positive, like I'm going to give you might say positive feedback, but or I'm going to give you praise, right? Or encouragement or something, as opposed to feedback is like, oh, you're doing something wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of it is just feedback is a skill and it takes practice. And that's the whole thing is you got to be able to practice, whether it's with a tool or a coach or, just standing in front of a mirror or just by yourself in your head. I don't know, but this, just like any sport or performance thing, you got to practice this stuff. These are things you do. You don't just go to a class and get better, and all of a sudden you're performing well in these things. So there's aspects of feedback, in particular the judgmental versus objective kind of feedback, that's super important. And I think that's where a lot of feedback that people get is not done that well.
Very
right?
true.
And it does have judgment in it. It is delivered in a way that doesn't align well with a person's personality traits or dispositional characteristics. And
Right.
a lot to, and it's very complex.
Absolutely.
One way of giving feedback to one person is not going to work well or the same with someone else.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, I'd love to keep talking. I could keep talking about feedback for a long time, but we are about at time. So before we wrap, I'd love to give you the opportunity if there's information you want to plug or anything, how can people get in touch with you if they want to work with you?
Sure.
Websites, emails, anything you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. So you can go to my website at regen-management.com. So regen-management.com, or easier way, follow me on LinkedIn. And on Instagram as well. So on LinkedIn, you can find me under KaShondra Anikwe. And then on Instagram, you can find me under Regeneration Management Consulting. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. This is great.